5 wooden posts driven deep into Arizona sand. 5 Apache women hanging upside down, wrists bound with rawhide that tightens in the sun. Blood dripping into dark pools below. The tallest woman, 6'4" of pure muscle, stared directly at me with amber eyes burning like desert fire. Not pleading, not broken, just recognition. I had seen her before, 5 years ago, at Black Mesa, when I led the cavalry to slaughter 187 innocent people. Now she was dying, and I had a choice to make. The same choice I made at Black Mesa. Silence or action. Survival or principle. This is the story of how one Apache warrior woman and one guilt-ridden mountain man brought down the most powerful criminal empire in the Arizona Territory. 12 days before I found Grace Red Hawk hanging in that desert. 5 wooden posts. Each one stood 12 feet tall, driven deep into the red Arizona sand. 5 Apache women, hanging upside down. Their wrists bound with rawhide, the kind that shrinks and tightens as it dries under the merciless sun. Blood ran in thin streams from their bound hands, dripping into the sand below, creating dark pools that looked almost black against the rust-colored earth. The tallest among them measured close to 6 feet 4 inches. Her body was extraordinary, massive shoulders and arms corded with muscle that would shame most men. Her buckskin outfit, torn and filthy, barely contained her frame. The deep V neckline of her halter top revealed extensive cleavage, even in her inverted position. Her massive breasts heaved with each labored breath. Her face, beautiful despite the agony etched across it, showed teeth gritted against the pain. Tears streamed upward into her long black hair, mixing with the dried blood from a gash across her temple. Her amber eyes, burning with an intensity that seemed to cut through the desert heat, looked directly at me. Not pleading, not begging, just recognition. Just as if she knew me, as if she had been waiting for me to arrive. And that was when I realized the truth. I had seen this woman before, 5 years ago at Black Mesa, when the world burned and everything I believed turned to ash. The year was 1871. I was 35 years old and working as a scout for the United States Cavalry, $20 a month to guide soldiers through the White Mountains of Arizona Territory. I knew every canyon, every water source, every trail that wound through those ancient peaks. I was good at my job. Too good. Lieutenant James Maxwell approached me in early October. He needed a guide to Black Mesa, an Apache settlement 3 days north. The Army wanted to negotiate a peace treaty, he said. Standard procedure, routine diplomatic mission. I believed him. God help me, I believed every word. We left Fort Grant at dawn with 40 mounted soldiers. The ride north took us through some of the most beautiful country I had ever seen. Ponderosa pines gave way to high desert sage. Mountains rose like cathedral walls on either side of our path. I led them through canyon passages I had discovered years before, shortcuts that would save us half a day's travel. On the 3rd morning, we crested the final ridge overlooking Black Mesa Village, just as the sun broke over the eastern peaks. Smoke rose from cooking fires. Children played near the creek. Women carried water in clay vessels. Men prepared horses for the day's hunt. It was peaceful, ordinary, alive. That was when I heard Lieutenant Maxwell give the order. No survivors. 2 words, spoken calmly as if he were ordering coffee. 2 words that revealed the truth I should have seen from the beginning. This was not a peace mission. This was an execution. I spun toward Maxwell, reaching for my revolver. Before my hand touched the grip, 3 soldiers had their rifles pointed at my chest. Maxwell looked at me with something close to pity. You can ride away now, Frost. Forget what you heard, or you can die here with them. Your choice. I should have chosen death. I should have fought. I should have done something, anything to stop what came next. Instead, I turned my horse and rode 20 yards back down the trail where I could not see but could still hear everything. The gunfire started at exactly 6:17 in the morning. I know because I was staring at my pocket watch, trying to focus on something, anything other than the screams. The shooting continued for 11 minutes. Then came the flames. They burned the bodies to hide the evidence. They burned the lodges to destroy any record of what had been there. They burned everything. But before the flames rose high in those chaotic minutes, when soldiers were reloading and Apache families were running in every direction, I saw her. A young woman, maybe 20 years old, fighting 3 soldiers with nothing but her bare hands and a hunting knife. She was tall, powerfully built, moving with a warrior's grace. She knocked one soldier unconscious with a rock, slashed another across the arm. The third one hit her from behind with his rifle butt. Something broke inside me then. I charged back into the chaos, firing my revolver into the air, screaming for them to stop. I reached the young woman just as the third soldier raised his rifle to finish her. I pulled her to her feet and shoved her toward the canyon wall. Run, just run. She ran. I watched her disappear into the rocks. Then I turned and saw a small boy, maybe 4 years old, crouched beside his dead mother. I scooped him up and carried him out of the village, bullets whipping past my head. The soldiers let me go. They had orders about me too, apparently. Let the scout live, let him carry his guilt. 187 people died that morning at Black Mesa. I saved two, a warrior woman whose name I never learned, and a boy named Jimmy Nighthawk. The Army arrested me for interfering with military operations. They held me in the stockade at Fort Grant for 2 days while they decided what to do with me. When they finally released me, everyone from Black Mesa was already buried in mass graves. The official report called it an unfortunate engagement with hostile Apache forces. Lieutenant Maxwell received a commendation for his decisive action. I went to the territorial governor. I went to federal investigators. I told them what really happened. They all said the same thing: no evidence. My word against a decorated officer and 40 soldiers who would swear Maxwell acted in self-defense. 3 weeks after Black Mesa, a soldier named Corporal Davis found me in a Tucson saloon. He bought me a drink. We talked about the weather. Then he leaned close and showed me the knife hidden under his coat. The brass wants you to stop talking about Black Mesa Frost. They want you to understand that sometimes good men have to make hard choices. They want you to choose life over principle. Then he stabbed me, not deep enough to kill, just enough to leave a scar across my chest that would remind me every day what happens to men who fight the system. I chose silence. I chose survival. And I have lived with that choice every single day since. I took Jimmy Nighthawk to the mission school in Tucson. I gave them money for his care. Then I rode into the White Mountains and did not come back. For 5 years, I lived alone in a cabin I built with my own hands. I hunted. I trapped. I spoke to no one. The silence of the mountains was easier than the noise of civilization, where every conversation felt like a lie. Now, 5 years later, I stood looking at 5 Apache women hanging upside down in the desert sun. And the tallest one, the one with eyes like burning amber, was the same woman I had pulled from the massacre at Black Mesa. Her name, I would learn, was Grace Redhawk, but I did not know that yet. All I knew was that someone had tortured these women and left them to die. All I knew was that their blood was creating pools in the sand. All I knew was that if I rode away now, I would be choosing silence again, choosing survival over principle. I had made that choice once before. At Black Mesa, I would not make it again. 12 days before I found Grace Redhawk hanging in the desert, she had been living in hell. Thomas Grimes owned a whiskey trading post 15 miles south of Copper Creek Station. He was 42 years old, 230 pounds, and mean when he was sober. When he was drunk, which was most of the time, he was something worse than mean. He was methodical. Grace had become his property 3 years earlier, not his wife. Property. The distinction mattered to men like Thomas. The transaction had been arranged by Victor Crow, the Indian agent assigned to the San Carlos Apache Reservation. Crow was 52 years old, well-dressed, educated, back east, and corrupt to his bones. He had a talent for making illegal things look legal. He had papers. He always had papers. The papers said that Black Mesa tribe owed $800 in unpaid reservation taxes. The papers said that tribal chief Joseph Redhawk could not pay. The papers said that the chief's daughter, Grace, aged 22 at the time, could work off the debt through indentured service to Thomas Grimes, licensed trader. The papers made it all look proper and legal. Grace had been trained as a warrior from the age of 12. Her father had taught her to track, to hunt, to fight with knife and bow and rifle. She could run 30 miles without stopping. She could survive for a week in the desert with nothing but a knife and her knowledge of the land. She stood 6 feet 3 inches tall and was stronger than most men. None of that mattered when Victor Crow arrived with 10 soldiers and official documents bearing the territorial seal. "Your daughter works for 3 years," Crow had told her father. "Then the debt is paid. She will be treated well. She will be safe." Every word was a lie. Thomas Grimes did not want a worker. He wanted something to own, something he could break. For 3 years, Grace endured. She cooked his meals. She cleaned his trading post. She mended his clothes. And when he came home drunk, which was almost every night, she tried to make herself invisible. It never worked. The scars on her back told the story her voice could not. Whip marks crisscrossed her muscular shoulders. Burn marks from cigarettes dotted her ribs. Her left wrist had been broken twice and healed crooked. The bruises on her neck and jaw were permanent now, yellow and green marks that never fully faded before new ones appeared. But Thomas had made one mistake. He had never broken her spirit. He had broken her body, yes. He had broken her hope, perhaps. But deep inside, in a place he could not reach, no matter how hard he hit Grace, Red Hawk remained a warrior. She kept a hunting knife hidden beneath the floorboard under her sleeping mat. Every night she would touch it, feel the weight of it. Imagine what it would feel like to drive it into Thomas Grimes's throat while he slept. Every night she chose not to, not because she feared death. She had stopped fearing death within the first month of living with Thomas. She chose not to kill him because she feared what would come after. Crow would hang her, or worse, he would sell her to someone else, someone who might be even crueler than Thomas. So she survived, day by day, hour by hour. She survived by remembering her father's words spoken to her when she was 14 years old and training to be a warrior. Survive first, daughter. Honor comes later. The warrior who lives to fight another day prevents 1,000 future sorrows. On October 3rd, 1876, Thomas Grimes climbed into his wagon to make his weekly run to Copper Creek for supplies. He was drunk. He was always drunk by noon. The wagon wheel collapsed half a mile from the trading post. The wagon lurched sideways and tumbled down a rocky embankment. Thomas was thrown from the seat. His neck broke before he hit the bottom. He was dead within seconds. Grace heard the crash. She ran to the embankment and looked down at Thomas's broken body sprawled across the rocks. She felt nothing. No relief, no joy, no grief. Just a vast emptiness where fear used to live. She climbed down and checked his body to be certain he was dead. Then she climbed back up and walked to the trading post. She gathered her few possessions into a cloth bundle, a spare buckskin dress, a pair of moccasins, a small leather pouch containing the last items from her life before Thomas, a turquoise stone her mother had given her, an eagle feather her father had tied into her hair when she completed her warrior training. She was packing these items when she heard horses approaching. Multiple horses, moving fast. Victor Crow arrived with Frank Deacon and 4 armed men. They did not look surprised to see Thomas dead. They looked like men who had been expecting it. Crow dismounted and walked to where Grace stood in the doorway of the trading post. He was tall, silver-haired, wearing an expensive suit that looked ridiculous in the Arizona desert. He smiled at her. The smile did not reach his eyes. "Mrs. Grimes, my condolences on your loss. Thomas was a valued business partner." Grace said nothing. She had learned years ago that silence was often the best response to dangerous men. Crow continued pulling papers from his coat pocket. "According to my records, Thomas loaned you to cover your father's debt. That debt was $800. Thomas paid me $600. You worked off $400 in 3 years of service. The remaining debt is $1,200. As Thomas's business partner, that debt now transfers to me." Grace found her voice. It came out steady, which surprised her. "I owe you nothing. I was sold like cattle. That debt is not real." Deacon stepped forward. He was shorter than Grace, but heavily muscled, with cold eyes and scarred knuckles. He looked at her the way hunters look at game animals. "The debt is legal, sweetheart. Signed and witnessed. You can pay it off in kind, or you can work it off in other ways. Mr. Crow has several mining camps that need strong girls for various services." The threat was clear. Grace felt her warrior training rising up, felt her hands curling into fists. She could kill Deacon. She was certain of that. But the 4 armed men behind him would kill her before she took 2 steps. Survive first. Honor later. Crow pulled another paper from his pocket. "However, I am not without mercy, Mrs. Grimes. I have received a letter from a gentleman who is seeking an Apache wife, a mountain man named Ezekiel Frost. He owns a land claim in the White Mountains. He offers $500 as a bride price to be paid to me, of course against your debt. You would still owe $700, but I am willing to forgive that amount in exchange for your agreement to marry Mr. Frost." Grace took the letter with trembling hands. The handwriting was crude but clear. I am seeking a strong woman who values work over comfort. My land is harsh. I am harsh, but I am honest. I will treat you fairly. If you can survive hard country and a hard man, meet me at Copper Creek Station on October 15th. If you do not come, I will understand. The letter was signed Ezekiel Frost. Grace looked up at Crow. Why would a mountain man want an Apache wife? Crow shrugged. White women are scarce in the territories. Apache women are strong workers. Perhaps he values practicality over romance. Or perhaps he simply wants company. Does it matter? Your choices are simple. Marry this man, or come work in my mining camps. Choose quickly. I have business to attend to. Grace thought about the mining camps. She had heard stories. Women who went to those camps rarely came back. The ones who did return were broken in ways that made Thomas Grimes look merciful by comparison. She thought about the letter, a mountain man who promised honesty, who offered partnership, not ownership. It could be a lie. Probably was a lie, but it was a chance. And after 3 years with Thomas Grimes, she had learned to value chances. I will meet this Ezekiel Frost. Crow smiled and tucked the letter into her hand. Excellent choice. The station is 40 miles north. I suggest you start walking. You have 3 days. Grace looked at the horses. You will not give me a horse, Deacon laughed. You are not owed anything, Apache. You walk or you do not go. Your choice. They left her standing in front of the trading post with nothing but the letter, her small bundle of possessions, in 3 days to walk 40 miles through desert and mountain country. She started walking. What Grace did not know was that the wagon wheel had not collapsed by accident. Someone had sawed halfway through the axle. Someone had wanted Thomas Grimes dead. And that someone was Victor Crow. What Grace did not know was that the letter from Ezekiel Frost was a forgery. Crow had written it himself, copying the signature from a land claim document Frost had filed years earlier. What Grace did not know was that Crow needed her gone before the federal investigators arrived next week to audit the reservation accounts. Grace was a witness. She had seen too much, heard too much. She knew about the systematic theft of silver meant for Apache food supplies. She knew about workers who disappeared into mine tunnels and never came back. Dead witnesses could not testify, but disappeared witnesses worked just as well. Crow had planned everything perfectly. Either Grace would die in the desert during the 3-day walk, or she would arrive at Copper Creek Station, be rejected by the confused mountain man who had never written the letter and have nowhere to go. Either way, she would vanish from his problems. What Victor Crow did not know was that Grace Redhawk had survived worse than a 40-mile desert walk. And what he definitely did not know was that Ezekiel Frost, despite 5 years of self-imposed isolation, still had enough conscience left to care about right and wrong. That conscience would be the thing that destroyed Crow's perfect plan. Grace walked for 3 days straight. She had 50 cents in her pocket money she had hidden from Thomas over 3 years of careful saving. She spent nothing. She ate roots and cactus fruit. She drank from streams when she found them and sucked moisture from barrel cactus when she did not. Her buckskin outfit, already torn from years of Thomas's violence, deteriorated further. The halter top barely covered her massive breasts. The short skirt rode up constantly, exposing her powerful thighs. She did not care. Modesty was a luxury for people who had choices. She was focused purely on survival. On the second night, she heard riders behind her. 3 men on horseback, keeping their distance, but definitely following. She hid in a rock outcropping and watched them pass. They wore no uniforms, no badges, just hired guns. Crow's men, making sure she actually left the territory, or perhaps waiting for her to collapse so they could finish her quietly. Grace waited until they were and then changed direction, adding 10 miles to her journey but losing her trackers. She arrived at Copper Creek Station just as the afternoon sun began its descent behind the western mountains. The station was not much to look at. A Wells Fargo office, a small general store, a saloon, maybe 40 buildings total, most of them rough timber structures built by people who cared more about shelter than beauty. Grace stood at the edge of town, suddenly aware of how she must look. Filthy, bloody from a dozen small cuts, her buckskin outfit torn to the point of indecency, her massive muscular body covered in bruises and scars. She touched the letter in her pocket. Read it one more time. October 15th, today. She walked toward the center of town. People stopped to stare. A few women pulled their children inside. Men watched her with expressions ranging from pity to hunger. She ignored them all. She was looking for one man, Ezekiel Frost. She found him outside a small cabin, shirtless despite the autumn chill, chopping wood with methodical precision. He was huge, 6'7" at least, with shoulders so broad they blocked the sun. His torso was a mass of muscle and scars. Old knife wounds across his chest, a bullet scar on his shoulder. His skin was deeply tanned and weathered. His hair, dark brown with silver at the temples, was long and tied back. His face was all hard angles and sharp edges. Not handsome in any conventional way, but striking, memorable. He sensed her presence and turned. For just a moment, something flickered in his steel-gray eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or shock. Then his expression went cold and flat. Grace pulled out the letter with shaking hands. Her voice, when she finally spoke, came out stronger than she felt. "I am Grace Redhawk. I came for you, to accept your offer of partnership." Ezekiel Frost stared at her for a long moment. Then he shook his head slowly. "I did not write that letter." The words hit her like physical blows. Grace felt the strength drain from her legs, felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Around them a crowd was gathering. She could hear their whispers, see their stares. "I do not understand. The letter says, the letter is a forgery. I do not know who wrote it or why they used my name, but it was not me. I do not want a wife. I do not want a partner. That part of my life is over." His voice was not cruel, just absolutely final. Grace looked at his face and saw no lie there, saw only a deep weariness in something that might have been regret. She had walked 40 miles. She had escaped Crow's trackers. She had survived on hope and determination. And now this stranger was telling her it had all been for nothing. Grace drew herself up to her full height. She would not beg. She would not cry. Not here. Not in front of these people. "Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Frost." She turned and walked away. Behind her, she heard the crowd murmuring, heard their judgment and pity. She walked past the Wells Fargo office, past the general store, past the saloon. She had no destination. She had 50 cents and nowhere to sleep when night fell. At the far end of the street, she saw a small building with a hand-painted sign, Chen Trading Post. Steam rose from the back. White sheets hung on lines in the yard. A laundry and trading operation, apparently. A woman stood in the doorway. She was old, maybe 60, small and thin. Her face showed both Chinese and Apache heritage. Her dark eyes were sharp and measuring. "You need washing," the woman said. Her English was accented but clear. Grace stopped. "I need work. I can sew. I can mend leather. My father taught me." The woman studied her for a long moment, taking in the bruises, the torn buckskin, the exhaustion. "You are the one Frost rejected." Of course she already knew. In a town this small, news traveled faster than horses. "I am. You have money for room and food." "No, ma'am, but I work hard. I can earn my keep." The woman's expression did not change, but something shifted in her eyes, perhaps recognition of one outsider by another. "I am Mary Chen. My husband was Apache. He died 5 years ago in mine accident. I run this laundry alone. Work is hard. You work 1 week for food and place to sleep. After 1 week, if you are good, we talk about wages. You agree." It was barely an offer, charity disguised as employment, but it was more than Grace had. "I agree," Mary nodded once. "Come, I show you where you sleep." The back room was barely large enough for the narrow cot and wooden crate that served as a table. The walls were thin boards that did little to keep out the cold. Grace could see daylight through gaps in the roof, but the cot had a blanket. There was a small stove in the corner. Mary lit the stove with practiced efficiency. "You eat with me at 6, rice and vegetables. Not fancy, but filling. Tomorrow you start at sunrise. I teach you my system. You learn fast or you make mistakes. I do not like mistakes. I understand." "Thank you, Mrs. Chen." The older woman paused in the doorway. "In this town, no one helps Chinese women. They think I am less because my skin is different, because my husband was Apache. They spit when I walk past. I know what it is to be unwanted, Miss Redhawk. I know what it is to survive anyway." She left without waiting for a response. Grace sank down onto the cot and finally allowed herself to feel the weight of the day. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them together, trying to still the tremors, and felt tears coming despite her best efforts. She had been so certain, so sure that the letter from Ezekiel Frost represented a new beginning, a chance to escape Victor Crow and the nightmare her life had become. Instead, she had found another kind of nightmare: public humiliation, destitution, a room with cracks in the walls, and 1 week to prove herself worthy of continued survival. Grace wiped her eyes roughly and stood. She would not do this, would not surrender to despair. She had survived Thomas Grimes. She had survived the walk through the desert. She would survive this too. Survive. She unpacked her small bundle with methodical care. The spare buckskin dress she hung on a nail in the wall. The turquoise stone and eagle feather she placed on the wooden crate, creating a small altar to her lost family. Then she sat on the kian and waited for 6 o'clock. When Mary called her to supper, they ate in silence. Rice from a battered pot. Vegetables Mary had grown in her small garden plot. The food was simple but good. Mary asked no questions about the bruises on Grace's face or the whip marks visible on her back. For that, Grace was grateful. After supper, Mary showed her the laundry operation. Great tubs of water heated over fires. Harsh soap that left Grace's hands red and raw after just minutes of exposure. A mangle for wringing out heavy, wet fabric. The work was brutal, just as Mary had promised. "Tomorrow I show you the mending," Mary said, as they banked the fires for the night. "Many miners tear their clothes on rocks. They need sewing. If you are as good as you say, we can charge more for mending than for washing. That is where real money is." Grace nodded, flexing her sore fingers. "I am as good as I say." Mary gave her a look that might have been approval. "We will see." That night, Grace lay on her narrow cot and listened to Copper Creek Station settling into darkness. Voices from the saloon raucous with drink and laughter. The lonely whistle of a train somewhere in the distance. The wind beginning to rise, carrying the smell of coming snow down from the high peaks. She thought about Ezekiel Frost, about the pain she had seen buried beneath the coldness in his eyes. She thought about how he had looked at her for just that one moment before his expression went flat, as if he recognized her, as if seeing her had reopened some old wound. There was a story there. Grace was certain of it, but it was not her story, not her business. She needed to focus on survival, on making herself valuable enough to Mary Chen that the old woman would keep her past the trial week. Everything else was distraction. She fell asleep thinking about needle and thread, about mending torn fabric and broken seams, about taking things that were ruined and making them whole again. It seemed like a good metaphor for her own life, if only it were that simple. The next morning arrived cold and gray, the sky heavy with clouds that promised snow. Grace woke before dawn and dressed in the near darkness. Her body ached from the 3-day walk and from sleeping on the thin cot. But she had experienced worse pain, much worse. Mary was already working when Grace emerged from the back room. The old woman's hands were deep in a tub of soapy water, scrubbing at a shirt that was more mud than fabric. "Good, you are on time. Take that basket. Those are mending jobs. I show you once, then you do rest yourself." The basket was full of torn trousers, shirts with missing buttons, coats with ripped seams. Mary demonstrated her system, quick and efficient, her stitches so small they were nearly invisible. She worked with the speed that came from decades of practice. "Now you. Show me what your father taught you." Grace threaded her needle and began to work on a pair of trousers with a 6-inch tear along the inseam. Her father had been a perfectionist. He had made her unpick stitches and start over again and again until she could sew a seam that would hold under the worst conditions. Those lessons paid off now. Her stitches were small and even reinforced at the stress points, nearly invisible from the outside. When she finished, she handed the trousers to Mary for inspection. The older woman examined the work in silence, turning the fabric this way and that, testing the seam with her fingers. Finally, she nodded. "Your father taught you well. This is good work. Better than mine, maybe." It was the first compliment Grace had received since arriving in Copper Creek Station. It warmed her more than the fire. "Do not thank me. Just work. We have 20 more pieces in that basket." Grace worked steadily through the morning. By noon, she had cleared the entire basket and started on a second one Mary brought from storage. Her fingers ached and her eyes burned from the close work, but she did not complain. This was honest labor. She was creating value with her own hands. After 3 years of being Thomas Grimes's property, That feeling was worth more than money. Around mid-morning, the door opened, and a man entered carrying an armload of laundry. He was young, maybe 25, with the build of someone who worked hard for a living, but it was his eyes that caught Grace's attention. They were cold, calculating. They slid over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Morning, Mrs. Chen. Got a week's worth for you. Mr. Crow wants it back by Friday. It will be ready." The man's gaze fixed on Grace. "Who is this, my employee?" "My business, not yours, Mr. Deacon." So this was Deacon, the man who had threatened her at Thomas's trading post, the man who worked as Victor Crow's enforcer. Grace kept her eyes on her sewing and said nothing. "Pretty thing," Deacon said, moving closer. "Where did you come from, sweetheart?" "Missouri," Grace lied, still not looking up. "Long way to travel." He was standing over her now, close enough that she could smell tobacco and something sharper. "Whiskey, though it was not yet noon. You come here looking for a husband. I came here looking for work." Deacon laughed a sound without humor. "Well, you found it, I guess. Though I could offer you better work than washing clothes. Easier on the hands." He reached out as if to touch her hair. Mary Chen stepped between them with surprising speed, a wooden paddle from the washing tub held in both hands like a weapon. "Get out, Deacon. Come back Friday for your laundry. Do not touch my employee." For a moment, Deacon's face went hard, and Grace saw the violence in him barely contained. But then he smiled and stepped back, hands raised in mock surrender. "No offense meant, Mrs. Chen, just being friendly. Friday, then." He left, and the room felt larger without a minute. Grace noticed Mary's hands were shaking slightly as she set down the paddle. "Who is he?" Grace asked quietly. "Frank Deacon, Victor Crow's right hand. He runs Crow's mine operations. Bad man. You stay away from him, Miss Red Hawk. He is the kind who takes what he wants and does not care who he hurts." Grace thought about the bruises on her face still fading to yellow and green. "I have known men like that. Then you know to be careful. In this town, Crow and his men have much power. Sheriff looks the other way when they cause trouble. You understand, I understand." They worked in silence for the rest of the morning, but Grace could not shake the feeling of Deacon's eyes on her. Could not forget the predatory hunger she had seen in his expression. She had escaped Thomas Grimes only to find herself in a town controlled by men just as dangerous. Just after noon, the door opened again. This time it was a boy, perhaps 10 years old, with freckles across his nose and dirt on his knees. He carried a bundle wrapped in brown paper. "Afternoon, Mrs. Chen. Ma sent these sheets, says she needs them back by Sunday." "Sunday? I can do Sunday. That is your mother's good sheets, Tommy. Tell her I will take extra care." The boy noticed Grace and his eyes went wide. "You are the lady from yesterday, the one Mr. Frost did not want." Grace felt her face flush, but before she could respond, Mary spoke sharply in what Grace assumed was Chinese, a rapid stream of words that made Tommy duck his head. "Sorry, ma'am. I did not mean to be rude. It is all right. You only spoke the truth." Tommy shifted from foot to foot, clearly uncomfortable. "My pa is the sheriff. He says Mr. Crow should not have done what he did, writing that fake letter and all. Says it was not right to trick you. Your father sounds like a wise man. He says Mr. Frost is not a bad man either. Just hurt real bad when his wife died. Says he has not been the same since." Grace's hands stilled on her sewing. Wife Tommy delivered this information with the casual cruelty of a child who did not understand the weight of such words. "She died having a baby. The baby too. That is why Mr. Frost does not want another wife. He is afraid it will happen again." Mrs. Chen made a sharp noise and spoke to Tommy in Chinese again, longer this time. The boy nodded and backed toward the door. "Sorry, I talk too much. Ma says so all the time. I will go now." After he left, Mary looked at Grace with something like sympathy in her eyes. "Children, they say too much. He told me what I needed to know." Grace's mind was working through this new information. Ezekiel Frost had lost a wife and child. That explained the pain she had seen in his eyes. That explained why Victor Crow would choose his name for the forged letter. A lonely widower might be desperate enough to seek an Apache bride through correspondence. But it also meant something else. It meant Frost was not her enemy. He was another victim of Crow's manipulation. And if Grace was right about the pattern, she was beginning to see Frost might be in danger too. "You eat lunch now," Mary said. "There is rice from last night. Then back to work." The afternoon passed in a blur of stitching and washing. Grace's fingers grew nimble with practice, and she found she could complete the mending faster than Mary had expected. By the time the sun began to set, they had cleared 2 full baskets and started on a third pile of torn mining clothes. "You are good," Mary said as they cleaned up for the evening. "Better than I expected. Tomorrow you can handle mending on your own while I do washing. We can take more jobs this way. Make more money. I would like that." Mary paused, studying Grace's face. "May I ask you something? The man who came this morning, Deacon, you said he works for Victor Crow. What exactly does Crow do besides own the mine?" Mary's face closed like a door slamming shut. "Better not to ask too many questions about Victor Crow, Miss Redhawk. Better to keep your head down and do your work. But if I am going to live here, should I not know who holds the power? Who to avoid?" The older woman was silent for a long moment, staring at the fire in the stove. When she finally spoke, her voice was low. "My husband worked in Crow's mine. Good worker. Strong. He was there when they found the new vein 5 years ago. Richest vein in whole mountain. My husband told me Crow was stealing. Taking silver out at night, not putting it in company records. Keeping it for himself. What happened to your husband?" "There was accident in mine. Cave-in. They said it was bad luck. Poor timber supports." Mary's hands clenched into fists. "But my husband, he told me the night before he died that someone had been tampering with supports. He was going to report it to territorial governor. Next day he was dead, crushed under tons of rock. You think Crow killed him? I know it, but I cannot prove it. And even if I could, who would believe Chinese Apache woman against richest man in territory? So I keep my head down. I do my work. I survive. That is all any of us can do." Grace felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. She had come to Copper Creek Station hoping to escape violence, only to find it waiting for her here in a different form. Not the drunken fists of a brutal husband, but the calculated cruelty of powerful men who killed to protect their secrets. That night, as she lay on her narrow cot, Grace thought about everything she had learned. About Victor Crow and his corruption. About Ezekiel Frost and his grief. About a town where the sheriff looked the other way, and justice was something you could buy if you had enough money. She thought about her 50 cents still tucked in her small pouch. A ridiculous sum, barely enough to buy bread. And yet it represented everything she had, the only buffer between her and absolute destitution. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, she dreamed of Thomas Grimes falling down the embankment, again and again, his neck breaking with a sound like a branch snapping. But this time, when she looked at the top of the embankment, it was not Thomas standing there. It was Victor Crow, smiling down at her with cold, calculating eyes. The next 3 days passed in a rhythm of work and watchful silence. Grace grew stronger, her hands toughening to the harsh soap and constant sewing. She learned the names of regular customers, learned which miners paid on time, and which had to be chased for their money. She learned to navigate the social currents of Copper Creek Station, learned who was safe to talk to and who should be avoided. She did not see Ezekiel Frost during those 3 days, though she found herself looking for him despite knowing better. She told herself it was only natural curiosity about the man who had rejected her. But late at night, alone in her cold room, she admitted it was something more. Some part of her wanted to understand him, wanted to see past the walls he had built to the grief that Tommy had described. On the 4th day, everything changed. Grace was in the front room of the laundry working on a particularly difficult mending job, a coat that had been nearly ripped in half. She was so focused on her stitching that she did not hear the door open until it banged against the wall with enough force to rattle the windows. Frank Deacon stood there, and this time he was not alone. 2 other men flanked him, both with the hard faces of those who were comfortable with violence. "Afternoon, Miss Redhawk. Where is Mrs. Chen out making deliveries? She will be back in an hour. Deacon stepped further into the room, his companions following. "That gives us plenty of time to talk. I have nothing to say to you, Mr. Deacon." "Oh, I think you do." He moved closer, and Grace stood up, putting the counter between them. "See, I have been hearing things. Things about you, asking questions. Questions about Mr. Crow and the mine. Now, why would a new girl in town be so interested in Mr. Crow's business?" Grace kept her voice steady. "I have asked no questions. That is not what I heard. I heard you have been talking to Mrs. Chen. And that old woman, she has always had a grudge against Mr. Crow, spreading lies about him, poisoning the minds of anyone who will listen. Deacon leaned against the counter. I would hate to think you were listening to her lies, Miss Red Hawk. I would hate to think you might spread them further. I am here to work. Nothing more. Good. That is good to hear. But his eyes said he did not believe her. Because it would be a shame if something happened to this laundry. Business accidents, you know, they happen all the time. A fire, a broken window, the kind of things that make it hard to keep working. It was a threat, clear and simple. Grace's fingers tightened on the edge of the counter. Is there something you want washed, Mr. Deacon? Or did you just come here to frighten me? For a moment, his mask of civility dropped, and she saw the rage underneath. You need to learn your place, woman. You need to understand how things work in this town. Mr. Crow runs Copper Creek Station. What he says goes. And right now he says this laundry has been causing problems, spreading rumors, making trouble. You want to keep working here. You keep your mouth shut and your head down. You understand? I understand that you are leaving now. The voice came from the doorway, deep and cold. Everyone turned. Ezekiel Frost stood there, one shoulder leaning against the door frame, his arms crossed over his bare chest. He was not a huge man in the sense of being fat or bulky, but there was something in his stillness that suggested violence held carefully in check. A storm waiting to break. This does not concern you, Grayson. Deacon had taken a step back from the counter despite himself. Frost. The name is Frost. And it concerns me when three men corner a woman who is alone. Seems to me that is not a fair conversation. We were just having a friendly talk. Did not look friendly from where I am standing. Frost pushed off from the doorframe and took a step into the room. His hands hung loose at his sides, but Grace noticed they were scarred across the knuckles. The marks of a man who knew how to fight. I think you and your friends should leave now. Come back when Mrs. Chen is here if you have legitimate business. Deacon's face had gone red. You are protecting her now. The woman you did not want. The woman you rejected in front of the whole town. I am protecting basic decency, something you seem to have forgotten. Frost's eyes were like winter ice. Leave, Deacon, before this becomes more than just a conversation. For a long moment, no one moved. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Grace could see Deacon's hand moving toward his gun, could see the calculation in his eyes. 3 armed men against 1 unarmed man. The odds seemed good, but Frost did not move, did not blink, just stood there with that terrible stillness, waiting. Finally, Deacon smiled. It looked more like a baring of teeth. Sure, Frost, we will go, for now, but you might want to think about the friends you make in this town, and the enemies. He gestured to his companions, and they left, filing past Frost with deliberate slowness, a final show of defiance. When they were gone, the room felt suddenly larger, the air easier to breathe. Frost turned to Grace. Are you all right? I am fine. But her hands were shaking now that the danger had passed. She clenched them into fists to hide it. Thank you for intervening. I was riding past, saw them come in, did not like the look of it. He hesitated, then added, Deacon is dangerous. You should be careful around him, so I have been told. Grace looked at him properly for the first time since the stagecoach station. In the better light of the laundry, she could see the lines around his eyes, the silver threading his dark hair, the weariness that seemed to go bone deep. She could also see the long scar across his chest, healed years ago, but still visible. Why did you help me? After what happened with the letter, I thought you wanted nothing to do with me. Frost was silent for a long moment. Then he said quietly, what happened with the letter was not your fault. You are not responsible for someone else's lies. And just because I cannot be what you came here looking for does not mean I want to see you hurt. It was the most he had said to her since their first meeting. Grace heard the pain underneath his words, the careful distance he maintained. Your wife, the one who died. I'm sorry for your loss. His face went absolutely still. Who told you about Anna? A child. Tommy Hayes. He did not mean any harm. No, I suppose in a town this size, everyone knows everyone else's business. Frost turned toward the door, clearly done with the conversation. Be careful, Miss Red Hawk. Deacon does not make idle threats. If he warned you about the laundry, he meant it. What would you have me do, Eve? He paused with his hand on the door. I do not know. But I know Victor Crow is not a man who likes to be crossed. And if Mrs. Chen has been spreading stories about him, true or not, he will find a way to silence her. You should not be caught in the middle of that fight. Perhaps I want to be in the middle of it. The words surprised Grace as much as they seemed to surprise Frost. But once said, she realized they were true. Mrs. Chen gave me work when no one else would. She gave me a chance. If Crow wants to hurt her for telling the truth about her husband's death, then maybe someone should stand with her. Frost turned back to face her fully, and for the first time she saw something other than distance in his eyes. Respect, maybe, or recognition. That is a dangerous choice, Miss Red Hawk. You just got here. This is not your fight. Maybe not, but if I have learned anything in my life, Mr. Frost, it is that sometimes the fights that choose us are more important than the ones we choose ourselves. Grace met his eyes steadily. I will not run from Frank Deacon. I will not abandon the woman who helped me. Whatever comes of that, I will face it. Frost studied her for a long moment. Grace had the sense he was seeing her for the first time. Really seeing her, not just the bruised, rejected bride, but the person underneath. Finally, he nodded, just once. You are braver than I gave you credit for. Or more foolish. I have not decided which yet. Perhaps both. The ghost of a smile touched his mouth. There and gone in an instant. Perhaps. Take care, Miss Red Hawk. And bolt your door tonight. Deacon likes to make his point when people are not expecting it. He left without waiting for a response. Grace stood alone in the laundry, her heart still pounding from the confrontation. Through the window, she watched him mount his horse, a powerful bay gelding, and ride away down the muddy street. She looked down at her hands, at the calluses forming from hard work, at the needle still clutched in her fingers. 4 days ago, she had arrived in Copper Creek Station with nothing but fear and desperation. Now she had work, a place to sleep, and it seemed an enemy in Frank Deacon and Victor Crow. And something else, something she had not expected. The beginning of respect from a man who had rejected her, a man whose grief ran so deep he had walled himself off from the world. Grace returned to her mending with new determination. She would not be driven away by threats. She would not abandon Mary Chen. And somehow she would find a way to survive in this hard town where power and corruption ran as deep as the silver veins in the mountains. Outside, the sky had grown heavy with clouds. The first snow of winter was coming. She could feel it in the air. Soon the mountain passes would close, and she would be trapped here until spring, for better or worse. The snow came that night just as Grace had predicted. She woke to a world transformed, white and silent. The rough buildings of Copper Creek Station softened under a blanket of fresh powder, but the beauty of the morning could not erase the memory of Frank Deacon's threats, or the knowledge that somewhere in this peaceful-looking town, dangerous men were planning their next move. Mary Chen said nothing when Grace told her about the confrontation, only nodded as if she had expected. Odd. They will come back. Men like Deacon, they do not give warnings and then forget. They come back to make sure you heard them. What will we do? We work. We survive. Same as always. Mary kneaded dough for the morning bread with practiced efficiency. You want to leave, Miss Red Hawk? I understand. This is not your fight. I will give you wages for the days you worked. Enough for stagecoach fare somewhere else. Grace thought about it. Truly thought about it. She could leave Copper Creek Station, take what little money she had earned, and move on to another town, another territory. Start over again somewhere Frank Deacon had never heard her name. It would be the smart choice, the safe choice. But she thought about Mary Chen's husband crushed under tons of rock because he had dared to speak the truth. She thought about the way Deacon's eyes had traveled over her like she was meat in a market. She thought about how many times in her life she had run from violence, how many times she had kept her head down and endured hoping that invisibility would keep her safe. It never had. I am staying. I am not running anymore. Mary looked up sharply. Then she smiled, a rare expression that transformed her stern face. Good. Then we fight together. What exactly are we fighting? That is what we need to find out. Mary dusted flour from her hands. My husband, before he died, he kept records, papers about the mine, about the silver Crow was stealing. I hid them when men came to search our house after the accident. I was too afraid to use them then. But maybe now is the time. Grace's pulse quickened. Where are they? Somewhere safe. But we cannot just show them to the sheriff. Hayes is in Crow's pocket. Has been for years. We need proof that even a corrupt lawman cannot ignore. We need to know where Crow is hiding the silver he steals. Before Grace could respond, the door to the laundry opened. Tommy Hayes burst in, his face red from the cold snow clinging to his wool cap. Mrs. Chen, Miss Red Hawk, there has been another robbery. Mary set down her bread dough. What robbery? The stagecoach from Fort Grant. It got held up at Canyon Ridge just north of town. 3 men with masks. They took the strongbox and shot the driver. He is alive, but Doc Morrison says it was close. Tommy's words tumbled over each other in his excitement. My pa is getting up a posse to track them. Mr. Frost volunteered to go. Grace felt something tighten in her chest at Frost's name. When did this happen? Yesterday evening during the storm. The coach did not make it to town until this morning. The robbers had hours to get away. Tommy looked between the 2 women. Ma sent me to tell you she needs her good dress cleaned by Sunday for church. She says the Reverend is going to preach about lawlessness and the need for righteous men to stand against evil. Mary snorted softly. Reverend Crawford preaches about many things. Doing something about them is different. After Tommy left, the 2 women looked at each other. Grace spoke first. How many robberies is that this year? 6. Mary's voice was flat. That seems like too many to be coincidence. What is on those stagecoaches that is worth killing for a silver? Not the ore from the mine that goes out by train, but refined silver in bars being shipped to banks in Fort Grant and beyond. Each strongbox could hold $10,000 to $20,000 worth. Grace felt the pieces beginning to fit together in her mind, though the picture they formed was still incomplete. If someone were stealing silver from the mine and needed a way to transport it without suspicion, staging robberies would be one way to do it. Make it look like outlaws, not inside theft. That is what my husband thought before they killed him for thinking it. Mary moved to the window, looking out at the snow-covered street. But proving it is another matter. The robbers wear masks. They leave no trace. And the sheriff, he investigates just enough to look like he is doing his job, then declares the trail cold. Then we do not go to the sheriff. Grace joined her at the window. We find the proof ourselves, and we take it to someone who cannot be bought. The territorial governor. Or a federal marshal. Mary looked at her with something like admiration. You are serious about this. I am serious about not letting evil men win just because they have money and power. Grace thought about Thomas, about how his violence had been tolerated because he was a man and she was only his property, because speaking up would have brought shame. I have spent too much of my life being afraid. I am done with that. Fear is not always weakness, Miss Red Hawk. Sometimes it is wisdom, perhaps, but sometimes courage is just fear that has decided to act anyway. They worked through the morning in thoughtful silence, washing and mending and planning. Grace's mind kept returning to the stagecoach robbery, to the coincidence of timing. Frank Deacon had threatened them yesterday. Last night, during the cover of a snowstorm, another robbery had occurred. Was that chance or design? Round midday, the door opened again, this time admitting Ezekiel Frost. He was dressed for riding, heavy coat and leather gloves, a rifle slung across his back. His face was grim. Mrs. Chen, Miss Red Hawk. He nodded to them both. I wanted to let you know I will be gone for a few days. The sheriff is taking a posse to track the stage robbers. I volunteered. That is dangerous work, Mary said. Less dangerous than letting robbers think they can operate with impunity. His eyes moved to Grace. I also wanted to make sure you had no more trouble from Deacon. Not yet, but I imagine it is coming. Frost's jaw tightened. I spoke to Crow this morning. Told him to keep his man on a leash. He assured me that Deacon was only trying to collect a debt, that there was no intention to threaten anyone. And you believed him, though. The word was flat, honest. But I wanted him to know that people are watching, that you are not alone here, even if it might feel that way. Something warm uncurled in Grace's chest, surprising her. Thank you, Mr. Frost. That is kind of you. It is basic decency, nothing more. But there was something in his eyes that suggested it might be something more, though he clearly was not ready to acknowledge it. I should go. Sheriff Hayes is waiting. With luck, we will be back in 3 days. With luck, you will catch the robbers, Mary said, and maybe learn who really sent them. Frost paused his hand on the door. You think the robberies are not what they seem? I think very little in Copper Creek Station is what it seems. Mary met his gaze steadily. Be careful out there, Mr. Frost. Watch who rides beside you. Trust is a dangerous thing when money is involved. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I will remember that. After he left, Grace found herself staring at the closed door, thinking about the way his voice had softened slightly when he spoke to her, the concern that flickered in those winter gray eyes. Stop it, she told herself firmly. That man buried his heart with his wife. He is not looking for someone new, and you should not be looking for him. But the heart she was learning did not always listen to logic. The rest of the day passed without incident, but Grace felt the tension building like a storm front moving in. Mary was quieter than usual, her movements precise but distracted. Finally, as they were closing up for the evening, the older woman made a decision. Tonight, after dark, I will show you what my husband found, but we must be careful, very careful. They ate a simple supper of rice and vegetables, neither woman with much appetite. Mary checked the locks on the doors twice, drew the curtains tight against the windows. When full darkness had fallen and the street outside was silent except for the distant sounds from the saloon, she gestured for Grace to follow her. They went into the back room where Grace slept. Mary knelt beside the small stove and worked at one of the stones in the floor, prying it up with surprising strength. Beneath it was a hollow space. From that space, she pulled an oilcloth-wrapped bundle. This is what got my husband killed. She unwrapped the bundle to reveal a stack of papers covered in neat columns of numbers and dates. He was good with figures. Better than most. The mine foreman, he knew this. So he had my husband keep secondary records, backup books in case the main ledgers were damaged or lost. Grace took the papers carefully, tilting them toward the lamplight. Even in the dim illumination, she could see the discrepancies. Columns that did not match, totals that had been altered, weights of silver ore that decreased mysteriously between the mine and the assay office. This shows systematic theft, thousands of dollars worth over the course of months, maybe years. My husband calculated it at $60,000 over 4 years, maybe more. Mary's voice cracked slightly. He brought these papers to me the night before he died, said he was going to take them to the territorial governor's office in Fort Grant, said Crow could not silence everyone. The next morning there was the cave-in. They brought his body out in pieces. Grace looked up from the papers to find tears streaming silently down Mary's weathered face. She reached out instinctively and took the older woman's hand, squeezing it gently. I am so sorry. I should have done something with these papers. You understand I should have. But I was afraid. I'm still afraid. Then I will be brave for both of us. Grace's voice was steady. We will use these. We will make sure your husband's death meant something. But we need more than just numbers on paper. We need proof of where the stolen silver is going. We need evidence that cannot be explained away. Grace thought about the stagecoach robberies, about the timing and the pattern. If Crow is stealing from his own mine and staging robberies to move the silver, there must be a place where he is hiding it. Somewhere between here and wherever the strong boxes are supposed to go. The old mining camp, Mary said suddenly. Up near Canyon Ridge. It was abandoned 5 years ago when the claims played out. But the buildings are still there. Remote, away from main roads. No one goes there anymore. Would Crow use such an obvious place? Sometimes the obvious place is the safest precisely because it is obvious. Who would look for stolen silver in an abandoned mining camp? Mary began rewrapping the papers. But we cannot go there ourselves. 2 women alone in the mountains in winter. We would freeze to death before we found anything. We need help, Mr. Frost, Grace said without thinking. Mary looked at her sharply. You trust him? Did she? Grace thought about the way he had faced down Frank Deacon, about the concern in his voice when he checked on her safety, about the pain she saw buried deep in his eyes. I think he is an honest man in a dishonest town. I think if we showed him the evidence, he would do the right thing. Or he would go straight to Crow. They have known each other for years. Crow was at Frost's wedding. They are friends, or were. Grace shook her head. I do not think friendship matters as much to Mr. Frost as doing what is right. You saw how he looked when you warned him about the posse. He already suspects something is wrong. He just needs proof. Mary considered this, then nodded slowly. When he returns from tracking the robbers, if he returns safely, we will approach him, but carefully, and we tell no one else, not the sheriff, not the reverend, not anyone. The fewer people who know, the safer we are. That night, Grace lay awake on her narrow cot thinking about ledgers and lies, about stolen silver and staged robberies, about a man who had loved his wife so much that her death had frozen him solid inside. The wind howled around the thin walls of her room. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled back, lonely and lost in the darkness. She thought about danger and courage and the strange path that had led her to this moment. If someone had told her a month ago that she would be planning to expose a corrupt mine owner in a Colorado mountain town, she would have laughed at the absurdity. And yet here she was, choosing to fight instead of run, choosing to stand with a woman she barely knew against men who had already proven they would kill to protect their secrets. Perhaps she was foolish. Perhaps she was brave. Perhaps, as Frost had suggested, she was both. The next 3 days crawled by with agonizing slowness. Grace and Mary worked with one eye always on the door, jumping at sudden noises, watching for any sign of Frank Deacon or his men. But the threatened retaliation did not come. The laundry remained unmolested. No fires broke out in the night. No windows were smashed. The waiting was almost worse than action would have been. They want us nervous, Mary said on the second evening. Want us to think about what might happen. Make us afraid so we stay quiet. That is how powerful men keep control. Not through constant violence, but through the threat of it. Grace understood. Thomas had been the same way. The anticipation of his anger had been almost worse than the actual blows because you never knew when they were coming. Never knew what might trigger his rage. The uncertainty was its own kind of torture. On the morning of the fourth day, word spread through town that the posse was returning. Grace was hanging wash in the yard behind the laundry when she heard the commotion. The sound of horses and men's voices. She dropped the sheet she was holding and hurried around to the front, Mary following close behind. The posse rode down the main street like something from a dime novel. 8 men on horseback, their faces red with cold, their clothes crusted with snow and mud. Sheriff Hayes rode at the front, looking satisfied with himself. Behind him came Ezekiel Frost and the others, and they were not alone. 3 men rode with their hands bound, their faces sullen and defiant. The captured robbers. The crowd that had gathered began to cheer and shout questions. Sheriff Hayes dismounted with theatrical flourish and held up his hands for silence. Good people of Copper Creek Station, we have apprehended the villains who have been terrorizing our stagecoach route. Justice has been served. Grace pushed through the crowd until she was close enough to see the prisoners clearly. They were rough-looking men, dressed in worn trail clothes with the hard faces of those accustomed to violence. But something about them struck her as odd. They looked like hired hands, not masterminds. They looked like men following orders, not giving them. Frost dismounted near where Clara stood and their eyes met briefly. He looked exhausted, his face drawn with cold and lack of sleep. But there was something else in his expression. Doubt. Unease. Mr. Frost, Grace said quietly, moving closer. May I speak with you? He glanced toward Sheriff Hayes, who was still making his speech to the gathered crowd, then nodded briefly. I need to see to my horse. They moved to the livery stable at the edge of the crowd, out of immediate earshot. Frost's bay gelding was breathing hard, its coat dark with sweat despite the cold. What happened out there? Grace asked. Frost began loosening the saddle girth, his movements automatic. Practiced. We tracked them to a line shack about 20 miles north. They had the strong box, or what was left of it, empty. They claimed they had already spent the money, split it up, and hidden their shares. He paused, frowning. But the story does not sit right with me. Why not? Because when we found them, they were just sitting there. No lookout posted, no attempt to cover their trail, almost like they were waiting to be caught. He pulled the saddle off and set it on the rail. And when Hayes questioned them, they gave up too easy. Confessed immediately. Men who would kill a stage driver do not usually fold that fast. Grace felt her pulse quicken. What if they are not the real robbers? What if they are just hired to take the blame? Frost looked at her sharply. That is a serious accusation, I know. But think about it. 6 robberies in 2 months, all perfectly timed, all along the same route. Then suddenly you catch 3 men who seem almost eager to be caught. Does that not strike you as convenient? He was silent for a long moment, his hand stilling on his horse's neck. You know something. What is it? Grace took a breath, making her decision. Mary had said to wait to be careful, but instinct told her that Ezekiel Frost could be trusted. Had to be trusted if they were going to stop Crow. I need you to come to the laundry tonight, after dark. Mrs. Chen and I have something to show you. Something that might explain what is really happening with these robberies. Grace. It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his rough voice sent an unexpected warmth through her. If you are involved in something dangerous, you need to tell me now. We are all involved in something dangerous, Mr. Frost. We just have not all realized it yet. She held his gaze. Will you come? He studied her face. She saw the internal struggle play out in his eyes. The part of him that wanted to stay distant, to keep his walls intact, warring with the part that recognized truth when he heard it. That could not ignore a call for help. What time? 9 o'clock. Come to the back door, and do not tell anyone where you are going, not even the sheriff, especially not the sheriff. Frost's expression darkened, but he nodded. 9 o'clock. I will be there. The rest of the day felt like walking through molasses. Time stretched and distorted until Grace thought the clock must have stopped. But finally, darkness fell and the street grew quiet. Mary locked the front door and checked it twice. Then they waited in the back room, the bundle of papers laid out on Grace's cot. At precisely 9 o'clock, a soft knock came at the back door. Mary opened it to admit Ezekiel Frost, who slipped inside quickly and removed his hat. His eyes went to the papers on the cot, then to the two women. This better be good. I left a warm fire and a decent whiskey to be here. It is better than good, Mary said. It is proof that Victor Crow has been stealing from his own mine for years. Proof that my husband was murdered for discovering it. And possibly proof that the stagecoach robberies are not what they seem. She handed him the ledgers. Frost moved closer to the lamp, reading with focused intensity. Grace watched his face as understanding dawned. Watched the disbelief give way to anger and then to grim determination. These numbers, if they are accurate, Crow has stolen at least $60,000 worth of silver. Maybe more. They are accurate, Mary said. My husband was meticulous. He double-checked everything. And he died the day after he decided to report this. Frost looked up, his gray eyes hard as stone. You think Crow had him killed? I know he did, but I cannot prove it. Just like I cannot prove the cave-in was deliberate. Just like I cannot prove Crow ordered the stagecoach robberies to cover his theft. Mary's voice shook with suppressed emotion. I have had these papers for 5 years, Mr. Frost. 5 years of being too afraid to use them. But I am tired of being afraid. And Miss Redhawk, she gave me courage to fight back. Frost's eyes moved to Grace. She saw something shift in his expression. Not pity this time, but something closer to recognition. The look of one survivor acknowledging another. These papers are evidence, but they are old. A lawyer could argue the numbers are outdated, that systems have changed. We need current proof. We need to catch Crow in the act. The old mining camp at Canyon Ridge, Grace said. Mrs. Chen thinks that might be where Crow is hiding the stolen silver. If we could find it, see the strong boxes from the robberies, that would be proof that cannot be denied. Canyon Ridge. Frost frowned. That is rough country, especially in winter. And if Crow is using it, he will have it guarded. Then we need to be smart about how we approach it. Grace's mind was racing. The sheriff and his posse just returned. Everyone will be celebrating the capture of the robbers. This might be the best time to investigate. When Crow thinks he is safe, you are not going, Frost said flatly. Either of you. If we are doing this, I will go. I will take someone I trust, and we will scout the camp. If we find evidence, I will ride to Fort Grant myself and bring back federal marshals. Who will you take? Mary asked. Who in this town do you trust completely? The question hung in the air. Frost opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. Grace saw the realization dawn on his face. In a town where the sheriff was corrupt, where Victor Crow held power over most of the businesses and controlled the largest employer who could be trusted. Absolutely, I will go alone then. That is suicide, Grace protested. If something goes wrong, if they catch you, no one will even know where you went. Then what do you suggest? Grace took a breath, knowing her next words would change everything. You take me with you, I can ride. My father taught me when I was young. And if we are caught, two people have a better chance than one of getting away to tell what we found. Absolutely not. Frost's voice was hard. I will not be responsible for putting you in that kind of danger. You are not responsible for me, Mr. Frost. I make my own choices. Grace stepped closer to him, close enough to see the flecks of darker gray in his eyes, close enough to smell the leather and horse and cold wind that clung to his clothes. I am going to that mining camp with or without you. The only question is whether we go together with some chance of success or whether I go alone and probably get myself killed. You are the most stubborn woman I have ever met. I will take that as a compliment. For a long moment they stood there locked in a battle of wills. Then surprisingly, Frost laughed. It was a short, rusty sound as if he had not laughed in a very long time, and his voice had forgotten how. My wife used to say I could be outmaneuvered by any woman with enough determination. I did not believe her then. I am starting to think she was right. The mention of his wife created a small silence. Then Mary spoke, her voice gentle. Your Anna, she would want you to do the right thing, Mr. Frost. She would want you to stop evil men, even if it meant taking risks. That is who she was. Frost's face closed down again, the brief moment of lightness vanishing. Do not presume to tell me what my wife would want. I am not presuming. Mary's dark eyes were steady on his face. I knew Anna. She came to me for washing before she died. We talked sometimes when she brought her linens. She told me about you, about how you always tried to do right even when it cost you. She was proud of that, proud of your integrity. She would be proud of what you are doing now. Frost turned away, his shoulders rigid. When he spoke again, his voice was rough. We leave tomorrow night. The moon will be near full. Enough light to travel by. He looked back at Grace. Can you ride in the dark? Can you keep up and keep quiet even if you are cold and scared? Yes. Then meet me at my ranch at sunset. Bring warm clothes and gloves. We will ride through the night and reach the camp by dawn. If we find what we are looking for, we document it and get out. No heroics, no confrontations. Understood. Understood. He moved toward the door, then paused and looked back at them both. If this goes wrong, if Crow finds out what we are doing, he will not just threaten you. He will kill you. Both of you. You understand that. We understand, Mary said. We have always understood. That is what it means to fight against power. You risk everything, but sometimes the risk is worth it. Frost nodded once, then slipped out into the night, silent as a ghost. Grace watched through the gap in the curtain as he disappeared into the shadows, then turned to find Mary looking at her with an expression that was hard to read. That man. He is falling for you, even if he does not know it yet, even if he is fighting it with everything he has. Grace felt her face flush. That is ridiculous. He barely tolerates my presence. I have lived many years, Miss Redhawk. I know what a man looks like when he is trying not to care about a woman. Ezekiel Frost, he is trying very hard not to care about you, which means he already does. Mary moved to the stove and began banking the fire for the night. Be careful tomorrow, not just of Crow's men, but of your own heart. Falling in love with a man who is still in love with a ghost is dangerous territory. I am not falling in love with him. Of course not. But Mary's slight smile suggested she did not believe that any more than Grace did. That night, Grace lay awake again, but this time her thoughts were full of the journey ahead. She tried to remember everything her father had taught her about riding, about surviving in rough country. She thought about what they might find at the old mining camp, about strong boxes full of stolen silver, about proof that could bring down Victor Crow and his empire of corruption. And yes, she thought about Ezekiel Frost, about the pain etched into the lines of his face, about the way his voice had softened when he spoke of his wife, about the brief moment when he had laughed and she had seen the man he might have been before grief hollowed him out. Mary was wrong. Grace was not falling in love with him. That would be foolish in too many ways to count. But she could admit in the privacy of her own mind that she cared what happened to him, that she wanted to see him smile again, really smile, without the shadow of loss darkening his eyes. Tomorrow night they would ride into danger together. They would either find the proof they needed or walk into a trap that could get them both killed. Either way, nothing would be the same after. The choice to act, the choice to fight back against injustice was like stepping off a cliff. Once you made that choice, there was no going back. You either learned to fly or you hit the ground hard. Grace intended to fly. The next day passed in a blur of preparation and anxious waiting. Mary helped Grace pack a small bundle of supplies. Dried meat and bread, a canteen for water. She found a pair of men's trousers and a heavy coat that had belonged to her husband. "You look like a boy," Mary said, studying Grace in the borrowed clothes. "That is good. Harder to recognize you from a distance if someone sees you." As sunset approached, Grace's nerves began to sing with tension. She had never done anything like this before, never deliberately walked into danger with her eyes open. Part of her wanted to back out, to tell Mary that she had changed her mind, that they should find another way. But she thought about the ledgers, about Mary's husband dying in the dark of the mine, about Frank Deacon's cold eyes and the bruise on her own face that was finally fading to yellow. No more running, no more hiding. She had promised herself that, and she meant to keep that promise. At sunset, she slipped out the back door of the laundry and made her way through the shadowed streets to the edge of town where Frost's ranch lay. It was a modest property, a small house and barn and corral, but all neatly maintained, but showing the wear of being worked by one man alone. Frost was waiting in the barn, 2 horses saddled and ready. He looked at her borrowed clothes and nodded approval. "Good. You will be less conspicuous." He handed her the reins of a gentle-looking mare. "This is Willow. She is steady and sure-footed. Trust her and she will take care of you." Grace mounted awkwardly, her body remembering movements it had not made in years. The saddle felt strange and familiar at once. The horse shifted beneath her with warm living weight. "I am ready." Frost swung up onto his bay gelding with easy grace. "We ride north toward Canyon Ridge, staying off the main trail. It is about 20 miles. Rough country. We should reach the old camp around dawn." Questions. What do we do if we encounter Crow's men? Run fast and hope they do not recognize us. His face was grim in the fading light. "I am carrying a rifle and a pistol, but I do not want to use them unless we have absolutely no choice. Shooting will bring more men down on us, and we will be vastly outnumbered." They rode out as the last light died in the west, the moon rising huge and cold above the mountains. The horse's breath steamed in the frigid air. Grace pulled her coat tighter, grateful for Mary's foresight in providing warm clothing. The temperature was dropping fast, and she knew that by midnight it would be bitter cold. They rode in silence for the first hour, picking their way through scrub pine and over rocky ground, following trails that seemed to exist more in Frost's memory than in any visible path. The moonlight turned the snow to silver, beautiful, and treacherous at once. Finally, when they had put several miles between themselves and Copper Creek Station, Frost spoke. "Tell me about your husband, the one who gave you those bruises." Grace's hands tightened on the reins. "What do you want to know? Was he always violent, or did something change him?" She considered lying, considered saying that Thomas had been a good man who had fallen on hard times. But something about the night and the danger they were riding into made her want to tell the truth. "He was always violent. I just did not see it until after the arrangement was made. Victor Crow sold me to him, to pay a debt that did not exist. Thomas wanted someone to own, someone he could break. And you stayed with him. Where would I have gone? My people were scattered after Black Mesa. I had no money of my own. The law would not help an Apache woman leave a white man for something as trivial as a beating." Grace's voice was bitter. "So yes, I stayed. For 3 years, I stayed and learned to walk quietly and speak softly and anticipate his moods. I became very good at reading violence, at seeing it coming before it arrived. It did not always help, but sometimes I could avoid the worst of it. I am sorry you endured that. Are you, or are you just being polite?" Frost was quiet for a moment. "I am sorry because I know what it is to lose someone and feel powerless to stop it. My wife Anna died because I was too poor to afford a real doctor. The midwife we had, she did her best. But when the bleeding started, she did not know how to stop it. Anna died in agony. Our daughter died with her. I held them both while they bled out, unable to do anything but watch." His voice had gone flat, emotionless. The way people spoke of unbearable pain. "So yes, I understand powerlessness. I understand the guilt that comes from surviving when someone you should have protected did not." Grace felt tears sting her eyes. "But you were not responsible for your wife's death. That was misfortune, tragedy, but not your fault. Whereas Thomas's violence was always his choice. He chose to hit me every single time. It was a choice. Maybe. Frost glanced over at her, his face shadowed in the moonlight. Maybe that is why I reacted badly when I first saw you at the station. That bruise on your face, it reminded me of Anna, of the times I failed her. I could not face being responsible for another person, could not risk failing again. He paused. But you are not asking me to save you. You are asking me to fight beside you. That is different. Yes, Grace's voice was steady. I am not a victim looking for rescue. I am a person looking for justice, and perhaps so are you. They rode on through the darkness, the horses sure-footed, despite the rough terrain. The moon climbed higher, casting strange shadows that made the landscape look alien and otherworldly. Once a wolf howled in the distance. Willow's ears flicked nervously, but she did not spook. Grace found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the ride, her body remembering old skills, her mind growing quiet in the way that came from focusing completely on the present moment. Around midnight, Frost called a brief halt near a small stream where the horses could drink. Grace dismounted stiffly, her legs protesting after hours in the saddle. She walked around, trying to restore circulation, while Frost checked their position against the stars. We are making good time. Another few hours and we will be near enough to Canyon Ridge to start being careful. Grace cupped her hands and drank from the stream, the water so cold it made her teeth ache. Tell me about the camp. What should I expect? It was a small operation, maybe 20 buildings at its peak. Most will be falling down now, abandoned for 5 years. There is one central structure that was the main office and ore storage. If Crow is using the camp, that is where he will have set up. Frost refilled his canteen. We approach from above, from the ridge. That gives us a view of the whole camp without being seen. If there are guards posted, we spot them before we commit to going down. And if there are no guards, if the camp is truly abandoned, then either we are wrong about Crow using it, or he feels secure enough not to bother with security. Either way, we investigate carefully. Just because we do not see guards does not mean they are not there. They remounted and continued north, the temperature dropping steadily. Grace's face felt numb, her fingers stiff inside her gloves. But the cold kept her alert, kept her focused on the task ahead. There was no room for fear or doubt, only the immediate reality of horse and trail and the man riding beside her. As dawn began to gray the eastern sky, Frost slowed their pace. They were in high country now, pine forest giving way to bare rock and snow. He pointed ahead to where a ridgeline cut across the sky. Canyon Ridge. The camp is just beyond it, down in a bowl-shaped valley. They dismounted and led the horses the last quarter mile, moving as quietly as possible through the snow. The world was utterly silent except for their breathing and the soft crunch of footsteps. No birds sang, no wind blew. It was as if the mountain itself was holding its breath. They reached the ridge and Frost gestured for Grace to get down. They crawled the last few yards and peered over the edge. Below them, the old mining camp spread out like a ghost town. Most of the buildings were indeed collapsing, their roofs caved in, their walls sagging. But 3 structures near the center of the camp looked maintained, their roofs intact, smoke rising from chimneys. And in front of the largest building sat 4 strong boxes, exactly like the ones used by the stage line. Grace's breath caught. We found it. We found it, Frost agreed grimly. Now we need to get close enough to verify those boxes are from the robberies. And we need to get back out without being caught. As if in answer to his words, the door of the main building opened. 2 men emerged bundled in heavy coats. Even from a distance, Grace recognized one of them. Frank Deacon. And where Deacon went, Victor Crow was never far behind. Grace and Frost lay flat against the frozen ground, watching as Frank Deacon and his companions circled the strong boxes like vultures around carrion. The morning sun was just beginning to touch the peaks above them, painting the snow gold and rose, a beauty that mocked the darkness of what they were witnessing below. Frost pulled a small brass spyglass from his coat and put it to his eye, studying the scene with intense focus. After a long moment, he passed it to Grace without speaking. She raised it to her own eye, and the camp below sprang into sharp detail. The strong boxes were marked with the Wells Fargo insignia, their locks broken, their lids hanging open to show empty interiors. Beside them sat wooden crates. And even from this distance, Grace could see the dull gleam of silver bars stacked inside. The morning light caught their surfaces, turning them into bars of captured moonlight. That is our proof. Those boxes are from the robberies. And that silver is what Crow stole from his own mine. We need to get closer. Close enough to read the serial numbers on those boxes. Serial numbers that can be matched to the robbery reports. That makes the evidence indisputable. Grace felt her stomach clench with fear. Getting closer meant descending from their safe vantage point, meant putting themselves within reach of Deacon and whoever else might be guarding this stolen fortune. But Frost was right. Without specific proof, a clever lawyer might argue that these were different boxes, different silver, that it was all innocent coincidence. How Frost studied the camp layout with the calculating eye of someone who had spent time in the military. There is a ravine that runs along the east side of the valley. We can use it for cover. Get within maybe 50 yards of the main building. From there, if we wait for the right moment when the guards are inside or looking the other way, one of us can make a dash to the boxes. One of us meaning you, one of us meaning me. Yes, he looked at her steadily. You stay in the ravine with the horses. If something goes wrong, if I am caught or shot, you ride hard for Copper Creek Station. Go straight to Tommy Hayes and tell him everything. His father may be corrupt, but that boy is honest. He will find someone who can help. Grace wanted to argue, wanted to insist that she could be useful. But she knew he was right. Frost moved with the confidence of someone trained for this kind of work. She would only slow him down, make him vulnerable, worrying about her safety. All right, but be careful. Careful is my middle name. He gave her a brief, tight smile that did not reach his eyes. Let us move while we still have the advantage of them not expecting anyone. They led the horses back from the ridgeline, then began the careful descent into the ravine Frost had spotted. It was steep and treacherous. Loose rock hidden under snow. More than once Grace's feet slipped, and only Willow's steady presence kept her from falling. The mare seemed to understand the need for quiet, placing her hooves with delicate precision, making hardly any sound at all. The ravine was deeper than it had looked from above. A slash in the earth carved by ancient water, its walls rising 15 feet on either side. They followed it as it curved around the camp, moving slowly, stopping often to listen. Grace's heart hammered so hard she was sure it must be audible. But the only sounds were the soft crunch of snow and the occasional distant voice from the camp. After what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, Frost held up his hand for them to stop. They had reached a point where the ravine came closest to the camp buildings. Through gaps in the rock wall, Grace could see the main structure perhaps 60 yards away. The strong boxes sat in front of it like an offering to the gods of greed. Frost tied his horse's reins to a stunted pine and gestured for Grace to do the same with Willow. Then he checked his pistol, making sure it was loaded, but keeping it holstered. Remember what I said? If this goes bad, you ride. No heroics, no trying to save me. You get that evidence to someone who can use it. Promise me. Grace looked at him, at the determination in his gray eyes, at the set of his jaw that spoke of a man who had already made peace with the possibility of dying today. I promise, but you come back, Ezekiel. You hear me? You come back. Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe? Or something softer. It was the first time she had used his given name, and she saw how it affected him, how it penetrated the armor he wore like a second skin. I will do my best. He moved to the ravine wall and began climbing, using the irregular rocks as handholds, his movements smooth and practiced. Grace watched him reach the top and peer over, studying the camp. Then he was over the edge and gone, a shadow moving across the snow toward the buildings. The waiting was agony. Grace pressed herself against the cold rock wall, listening for any sound of alarm, any shout or gunshot that would indicate Frost had been spotted. The horses stood patient beside her, their breath steaming in the cold air. Bubba Raven called out once, harsh and lonely, then fell silent. Time stretched like taffy. Grace counted her own heartbeats, trying to estimate how long Frost had been gone. 2 minutes, 5, 10. How long did it take to reach the strong boxes, to read and memorize serial numbers, to retreat to safety? Then she heard voices, coming closer. Male voices, rough with early morning cold and boredom. Through a gap in the rocks above, she saw 2 men walking past. So close she could have reached up and touched their boots, tired of babysitting empty boxes. One was saying, Crow should have moved this stuff out days ago. Every hour it sits here is another hour we could get caught. Quit complaining, the other man responded. We are getting paid triple wages to sit up here in the cold. I will take that over working in the mine any day. They moved on, their voices fading. Grace let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Empty boxes. That was what the guard had said, which meant the silver had already been moved, or was about to be. If they did not act now, the evidence might disappear forever. Where was Frost? Grace risked raising her head above the ravine edge, scanning the area near the main building. At first, she saw nothing, just snow and shadow and the empty strong boxes sitting like accusations in the morning light. Then movement caught her eye. A figure crouched behind one of the boxes, partially hidden by angle. Frost. He was there. He had made it. And even as Grace watched, he pulled out a small notebook and began writing, copying down the numbers stamped into the metal. Relief flooded through her, so intense it made her dizzy. But then another door opened. This one on the side of the building Frost had not been watching. Frank Deacon emerged. And he was not alone. Victor Crow himself walked beside him, dressed in an expensive coat that looked ridiculous in this rough setting, his silver beard glinting in the sun, and they were walking directly toward the strong boxes, directly toward where Frost crouched, exposed and vulnerable. Grace's mind raced. She could shout a warning, but that would only alert everyone to Frost's presence without giving him any real advantage. She could create a distraction. But what the horses? The sound of a horse in the ravine might draw attention away, but it would also reveal her position and compromise any chance of escape. In the end, the choice was made for her. One of Crow's men, circling around from the other direction, spotted something wrong. Hey, someone is behind those boxes. Frost erupted into motion, sprinting away from the strong boxes toward the ravine, his long legs eating up the distance. But he had 60 yards to cover her, and the men had guns already drawn. The first shot rang out impossibly loud in the cold air. Snow exploded near Frost's feet. Grace did not think. She grabbed Frost's rifle from his saddle scabbard, the one he had left with the horses, rather than carry on his reconnaissance. She had not fired a gun since her father had taught her basic marksmanship years ago. But her body remembered. She climbed out of the ravine, found a stable position behind a rock, and aimed at the sky above the camp. She fired. The shot echoed off the mountains like thunder. Every man in the camp froze, looking around for this new threat, trying to locate the shooter. In that moment of confusion, Frost reached the ravine edge and vaulted over, dropping into the shelter of the cut earth. "What in the hell are you doing?" he gasped, grabbing the rifle from her hands. "I told you to stay hidden." "You are welcome," Grace shot back, already moving to Willow and mounting in one swift motion. "Did you get the numbers?" "Yes, but that does not matter if we are dead." They rode hard and fast, the horses, sensing their urgency, stretching out into full gallops despite the treacherous terrain. Behind them, Grace could hear shouts, the sound of men scrambling to saddle their own mounts to give chase. She leaned low over Willow's neck, trusting the mare to find the safest path through the snow and rock. The cold air burned her lungs. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it, the moment where everything could go catastrophically wrong, where one misstep could send them tumbling down a cliff, where one well-aimed bullet could end their lives. They burst out of the ravine, and Frost led them not back the way they had come but west, toward even rougher country. "They will expect us to head for Copper Creek Station," he shouted over the thunder of hooves. "We go the long way around through the high pass." In winter, Grace's voice was nearly lost in the wind. "That is suicide, so is letting them catch us." The chase lasted for what felt like a lifetime. Several times Grace heard gunshots behind them, heard bullets wind past like angry wasps. But Frost rode like a man possessed, choosing paths that took advantage of every fold in the ground, every stand of trees, every feature that might shield them from their pursuers. The men chasing them had horses bred for pulling ore carts, not for mountain pursuit. Frost's bay and Grace's borrowed mare were range horses built for endurance and sure-footed in rough terrain. Slowly and inexorably, they pulled ahead. By midday, they had left the chase behind, entirely climbing into country so high and remote that even the pine trees gave up, leaving only bare rock and endless snow. The cold here was brutal, cutting through Grace's borrowed coat, making her face feel like carved wood. But they were alive, and they had the evidence, the serial numbers from the strong boxes written in Frost's careful hand, proof that could not be denied. They stopped in the shelter of a massive boulder to rest the horses and catch their breath. Both of them were shaking from cold and exhaustion in the aftermath of fear. Frost pulled out the notebook, checking that it had survived the flight intact, then tucked it carefully inside his coat next to his heart. That was the most foolish, brave, idiotic thing I have ever seen anyone do, he said, looking at Grace with an expression she could not quite read. You could have been killed. You should have run like I told you. If I had run, you would be dead now, or captured. Grace's teeth were chattering, making it hard to speak clearly. I made my choice, just like you made yours when you went down to those boxes, Grace. He reached out and took her face in his gloved hands, tilting it up so she had to meet his eyes. You saved my life. Do you understand that? That shot you fired, that moment of distraction, that was the difference between me making it to the ravine and me catching a bullet in the back. Then I am glad I am a good shot. He laughed, the sound startling in the vast silence of the high country. You are an extraordinary woman. I have been trying very hard not to notice that, but you make it extremely difficult. Grace's breath caught. They were standing very close now, close enough that she could see the ice crystals caught in his dark hair, could feel the warmth of his breath in the cold air. Ezekiel, I know, his voice was rough, I know, and I am sorry, because I cannot give you what you deserve. My heart is buried with Anna, and I do not know how to dig it up again. I do not know if I want to. I am not asking you to forget her. I would never ask that. Grace's hands came up to rest on his chest, feeling his heart beating hard and fast under her palms. But maybe you can remember her and still live. Maybe you can honor her memory by not being alone forever. Maybe. He let his forehead rest against hers just for a moment, a gesture of intimacy that made Grace's chest ache. But not today. Today, we need to survive this mountain and get back to Copper Creek Station. We need to make sure Mrs. Chen is safe, and we need to get this evidence to someone who can act on it. He was right, of course. Grace stepped back, breaking the contact between them, though part of her wanted to stay in that moment forever, wanted to exist in that brief space where Ezekiel Frost had allowed himself to be vulnerable, to acknowledge what was growing between them, whether he wanted it to or not. They remounted and continued their journey, following a path only Frost seemed to know, threading through high passes that should have been impassable this late in the season. But the weather held, cold but clear, and the horses proved their worth again and again, carrying them through terrain that would have defeated lesser animals. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, they finally emerged from the high country onto a trail that Grace recognized from her journey to Copper Creek Station. They were coming in from the north, the long way around just as Frost had planned, but they were nearly home. We need to go straight to Tommy Hayes, Frost said as the town came into view below them, smoke rising from 100 chimneys into the dimming sky. Get this evidence to him before Crow knows we are back. Once it is in other hands, we become less valuable as targets. But as they descended toward the town, Grace saw something that made her blood run cold. Smoke, thicker and blacker than normal chimney smoke, rising from the south side of town, from exactly where the laundry stood. No, she breathed. Oh no, no. Frost saw it too. His face went grim and he spurred his horse faster, Grace keeping pace beside him. They thundered into town, drawing stares from people on the street, and headed straight for the source of the smoke. The laundry was burning, not completely engulfed yet, but flames licked from the windows of the main building. The back room where Grace had slept was already collapsed into char and ash. A crowd had gathered, buckets being passed hand to hand in a futile effort to stop the blaze. But it was clear the building was lost. Grace leaped from her horse before Willow had fully stopped running toward the crowd. Mrs. Chen. Where is Mrs. Chen? A woman she recognized from delivering mending caught her arm. She got out, honey. She is over there with Dr. Morrison. Grace pushed through the crowd and found Mary sitting on the ground, her face black with soot, her hands burned raw. Doc Morrison was wrapping her hands in clean bandages, his expression grave. When the older woman saw Grace, relief flooded her face. You are alive. I feared the worst when you did not return. Grace dropped to her knees beside her. What happened? Who did this? Frank Deacon. Mary's voice was hoarse from smoke. He came this afternoon with 3 men, said it was payment for spreading lies about Victor Crow. They poured kerosene on the walls and lit it. I barely got out. She coughed a deep rattling sound. They took the papers, the ledgers your husband kept. They searched until they found them. Then they burned those too. Grace felt the bottom drop out of her stomach. The papers, their evidence of years of theft, gone. Without them, all they had were serial numbers from strong boxes and the word of two people against the richest man in the territory. But Frost was there kneeling beside them. They burned the papers you had hidden. But did they find their copies? Mary looked up sharply. What copies? The copies you made before you showed them to us. Because you are too smart to keep all your evidence in one place. Frost's eyes were steady on hers. Please tell me I am right. For a long moment, Mary just stared at him. Then, despite the pain she must have been in, despite having just watched her livelihood burn, she smiled. You are right, I made copies 3 years ago, when I finally got brave enough to think about using them. They are with Reverend Crawford. He does not know what they are, just that I asked him to keep a packet of papers safe for me. Relief flooded through Grace so intensely her vision blurred. Then we still have evidence. We still have a chance. We have more than a chance. Frost stood up, his voice carrying across the crowd. Where is Sheriff Hayes here? The sheriff pushed through the gathered townspeople, his face red and angry. Frost, what the hell is going on? I heard you and Miss Redhawk went missing last night. And now the laundry is burning and she is accusing Frank Deacon of arson. Not accusing, stating facts. Frost's voice was hard as iron. And I can add a few facts of my own, such as the fact that Victor Crow is running a theft operation out of the old Canyon Ridge mining sham, such as the fact that the stagecoach robberies were staged to cover his tracks, such as the fact that I have serial numbers from Wells Fargo strongboxes currently sitting at that camp. Strongboxes that match the robberies you claim to have solved by arresting 3 convenient scapegoats. The crowd erupted in murmurs, people turning to each other, voices rising. Sheriff Hayes' face went from red to purple. That is a serious accusation, Frost. You better have proof. I have proof. Frost pulled the notebook from his coat. And Mrs. Chen has ledgers documenting years of theft from the Crow mine. And Miss Redhawk has testimony about threats and intimidation. We have enough to hang Victor Crow and Frank Deacon both. You are talking about the richest, most powerful man in this territory, Hayes said. But his voice had lost its bluster. You understand what you are doing? What this will mean, you understand, I am doing what is right. What you should have been doing it all along. Frost looked around at the gathered crowd. How many of you have lost money to these robberies? How many of you work in Crow's mine for wages that barely keep you fed, while he steals thousands of dollars of silver? How many of you have stood by while he corrupted every institution in this town from the law to the church? Silence. But it was a different kind of silence now, charged with possibility. Grace saw it in the faces around her, saw the moment when ordinary people began to remember that they outnumbered the corrupt. That power ultimately came not from money, but from the consent of the governed. Tommy Hayes pushed through the crowd, his young face fierce. Mr. Frost is telling the truth. I heard Mr. Deacon bragging to his men. Heard him say they had burned out the Chinese woman. That she would not be a problem anymore. Heard him laugh about it. Sheriff Hayes looked at his son and something in his face shifted. Shame maybe, or the first stirring of conscience after years of looking the other way. Tommy, you should not repeat things you hear. Why not? Because it makes you look bad. Tommy's voice cracked with emotion. You always taught me to tell the truth, Pa. To stand up for what is right. Was that all just words? The sheriff flinched as if struck. He looked at his son, at the gathered crowd, at Frost holding the damning notebook. Grace saw the internal struggle play out across his weathered face, saw the moment when a fundamentally decent man who had made bad choices decided to stop making them. All right, Hayes said heavily. All right, let me see this evidence. Frost handed him the notebook. The sheriff read through it, his expression growing darker with each page. Then he looked up at Frost. This is not enough to convict. You know that. Serial numbers could be explained away. And old ledgers, even if we recover them, those happened years ago. Statute of limitations might have run out. Then we need to catch him in the act, Grace said. All eyes turned to her. Crow does not know we escaped. He does not know we got away with evidence. Right now he thinks we are dead or captured in the mountains. So what will he do? He will move that silver. He will want to get it away from Canyon Ridge before anyone else goes looking. She is right, Frost said. The silver is still hidden there in those crates. Moving it is risky, but leaving it is riskier. Crow will have to act soon. Sheriff Hayes was nodding slowly. We set up an ambush. Catch them transporting stolen goods. That is something even a corrupt judge could not ignore. But how do we know when he will move it? Could be tonight. Could be next week. It will be tonight, Mary said quietly. Everyone turned to her. Despite her injuries, despite her exhaustion, her eyes were bright and sharp. Men like Crow, they think they are untouchable, but they are also careful. The fire at my laundry was not just revenge. It was eliminating evidence. Now he will move quickly to eliminate the rest. Tonight. While he thinks everyone is distracted by the fire and the search for Miss Redhawk and Mr. Frost. Tonight is when he moves. Then tonight is when we stop him, Sheriff Hayes said. His voice was stronger now, more certain. He looked around at the gathered men. I need volunteers, armed men who can ride and who are not afraid of a fight. Crow will have guards on that silver. This could get dangerous. Hands went up throughout the crowd. Not everyone, but enough. 20 men, 30. Some Grace recognized from around town, some she had never seen before. Men who worked in the mine and resented Crow's corruption. Men who had lost money in the robberies. Men who simply believed in justice and were willing to fight for it. Frost stepped forward. I will organize the groups. Hayes, you and I lead separate teams. We set up positions on both sides of the road between Canyon Ridge and town. They try to move the silver, we catch them in the middle with no escape route. What about Crow himself? Someone called out. He will not be with the silver. He is too smart for that. He will be here in town, at his big house, with alibis ready. Let me handle Victor, a new voice said. Everyone turned to see a thin, nervous-looking man stepping forward. I am Peters, Victor Crow's clerk. I have worked for him for 8 years. I know where all the bodies are buried. Figuratively speaking, he took a shaky breath. I know about accounts in Fort Grant banks under false names. I know about bribes to territorial officials. I have been too afraid to speak up. But if you are going after him, if you really mean to bring him down, then I will testify. I will tell everything. Momentum was building now. Grace could feel it like a wave gathering itself before it broke. This was how things changed, she realized. Not through grand gestures or heroic individuals, but through ordinary people deciding they had had enough, deciding to stand together against injustice. The sun was setting now, the sky ablaze with orange and red. In the dying light, Sheriff Hayes organized his posse, dividing them into groups, assigning positions, checking weapons. Frost moved among the men with quiet authority, answering questions, calming nerves. This was what he had done in the war, Grace realized. Led men into danger, made life and death decisions. Mary was taken to the boarding house to rest, her hands bandaged, her breathing still ragged from smoke. Doc Morrison promised to check on her through the night. As she was being helped away, she caught Grace's hand. Be careful, and thank you for caring, for fighting. You did not have to. Yes, I did, Grace said simply. We all do. That is what it means to be human. As darkness fell, the posse rode out in small groups heading for the ambush positions Frost had chosen. Grace found herself once again on Willow, riding beside Frost toward Canyon Ridge for the second time in 2 days. But this time they were not alone. This time they had the weight of law and community behind them, imperfect as both might be. They reached the ambush site around midnight and took up positions in the rocks and trees flanking the road. The moon was just past full, providing enough light to see by, but also enough shadow to hide in. Men settled in with their rifles, stomping their feet quietly against the cold, their breath steaming in the frigid air. The weight was excruciating. Every sound made Grace's heart jump. Every crack of a branch or call of a night bird. Beside her, Frost was absolutely still, his rifle resting across his knees, his eyes fixed on the road below. The moonlight caught the silver in his hair and made him look like something carved from stone. Patient and eternal. Hours passed. Some men began to whisper that they had guessed wrong, that Crow had moved the silver earlier or would wait until tomorrow. But Frost shook his head. He will come. Mrs. Chen was right. He thinks he has eliminated the threat. He thinks we are dead or lost in the mountains. He will come. And he did. Just before dawn, when the sky was beginning to gray, but true daylight was still an hour away, they heard it. The sound of wagons. Many wagons. horses. Men's voices kept deliberately low. The convoy emerged from the direction of Canyon Ridge. 6 wagons heavy laden with cargo surrounded by a dozen armed riders. Frank Deacon led the procession, easily recognizable, even in the dim light. And there, riding a magnificent black horse near the center of the column, was Victor Crow himself. Grace had been wrong. He had not stayed safely in town. He had come to personally oversee the transportation of his stolen fortune. Sheriff Hayes stepped out into the road ahead of the convoy, his badge glinting in the pre-dawn light. 24 rifles emerged from the shadows around him, all pointed at the wagons. "That is far enough, Victor. You are under arrest for theft, fraud, arson, conspiracy to commit murder, and probably a dozen other charges we will think of once we get you in a cell." The convoy stopped. For a moment, no one moved. Then Crow laughed, the sound carrying clearly in the cold air. "Hayes, I should have known you would finally grow a conscience at the worst possible time. You do realize I own you. I own half the men standing with you. One word from me and your career is over. Your reputation destroyed." "Maybe so," Hayes said, "but I reckon my reputation is already pretty well destroyed considering I let you corrupt me in the first place. Might as well go down trying to do one right thing." "Touching, truly." Crow's voice dripped with sarcasm. "But I think you are forgetting something, Sheriff. I have 12 armed men. You have, 20, 30 farmers and miners, most of whom have never fired a shot in anger. You want to start a battle here? Good men will die. Is that really what you want?" "Good men have already died," Frost called out, stepping into view with his rifle leveled. "Mrs. Chen's husband, the stagecoach driver who was shot during one of your fake robberies. How many others, Victor? How many lives have you destroyed in your greed?" Crow's eyes fixed on Frost, and even from a distance Grace could see the rage that contorted his features. You should be dead. I sent men after you. Your men were not good enough. But I was good enough to get the evidence. Serial numbers from the strong boxes at Canyon Ridge, matching them to the robbery reports. Ledgers showing systematic theft from your mine. Testimony from your own clerk about bribes and fraud. It is over, Victor. The only choice you have now is whether you surrender peacefully or whether people die before you are taken. For a long, terrible moment, the world balanced on a knife edge. Grace could feel the tension, could see Deacon's hand moving toward his gun, could see Crow calculating odds and outcomes. This was the moment where everything could go catastrophically wrong, where violence could erupt and good men die as Crow had predicted. Then Tommy Hayes, that brave, foolish boy, walked out into the road. He was not armed. He simply stood there in front of his father, looking up at Victor Crow with eyes that held no fear, only determination. "My pa is trying to do the right thing, maybe for the first time in a long time. Are you really going to start shooting with a kid standing here?" Crow stared down at the boy. Behind him, Frank Deacon was reaching for his gun, but Crow held up a hand, stopping him. Something in the mine owner's face shifted, calculation giving way to a kind of weary resignation. "I built this town. I brought the mine here. I created jobs. I made Copper Creek Station what it is. And this is how I am repaid. With betrayal and arrest. You built a fortune on theft and lies," Hayes said. "That is not building, that is stealing. Now step down from that horse and surrender, or I will be forced to use violence." For another long moment, Grace thought Crow would refuse, would order his men to fight. But then slowly he dismounted and his hands went up in surrender. "Take him," Hayes said. And several men moved forward to bind Crow's hands. Deacon and the other guards were disarmed without resistance, their will to fight evaporating once their leader surrendered. It was over. Grace felt the tension drain from her body so completely that she nearly collapsed. Frost caught her, his arms strong around her waist. "Easy, it is done, you did it. We did it," she corrected. "All of us." As the sun rose over the San Juan Mountains, painting the snow gold, and rose, the posse began the journey back to Copper Creek Station with their prisoners and the recovered silver. Grace rode beside Frost, bone-tired, but filled with a fierce joy. They had won. Justice for once had prevailed. In the days that followed, the full extent of Crow's crimes came to light. Peters, the clerk, proved as good as his word, providing detailed records of corruption that reached all the way to Fort Grant. Federal marshals arrived and took over the case. Crow and Deacon were transferred to the territorial prison to await trial, a trial that everyone knew would result in long sentences. Mary slowly recovered from her burns. The town, feeling guilty about how they had treated her, came together to rebuild the laundry, bigger and better than before. Grace worked alongside them, her skills with needle and thread making her invaluable. And Frost began to change. The walls he had built around his heart did not come down all at once, but they cracked, letting in light little by little. He came by the laundry most evenings ostensibly to help with the rebuilding, but really just to talk with Grace, to sit beside her and share the quiet companionship of two people who had survived something terrible together. 3 weeks after Crow's arrest, Frost invited Grace to his ranch for dinner. It was a simple meal, venison stew and fresh bread, eaten by the fire while the winter wind howled outside. They talked about everything and nothing, about the future and the past, about dreams and fears and the strange paths that had led them both to Copper Creek Station. As the evening wound down, Frost took Grace's hand, his calloused fingers gentle on her work-roughened skin. "I am not the same man I was when you arrived on that stagecoach. You changed me, not by asking me to forget Anna, but by reminding me that being alive means more than just breathing." "I am not the same woman either," Grace said softly. "I came here looking for safety. I found something better. I found purpose. I found strength I did not know I had. I found you." He kissed her then, gentle and tentative. A first kiss that tasted of hope and new beginnings. When they parted, both of them were smiling. "I do not know what happens next. I do not know how to build something new when the old still haunts me. But I would like to try to with you if you are willing." Grace thought about the journey that had brought her here, the violence and fear, the desperation and loss, but also the courage, the friendship, the justice won against terrible odds. She thought about Mary and Tommy and all the ordinary people who had decided to stand together against corruption. She thought about 50 cents in her pocket and a bruise on her face, about a rejected bride who was not wanted, and a mountain man who had forgotten how to love. And she thought about how both of them had found something more valuable than safety or wealth. They had found themselves in each other. "I am willing," she said. "I am absolutely willing." Outside, the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new struggles. But for tonight, in this small ranch house in the mountains, two wounded souls had found healing in each other's company. The ghosts of Canyon Ridge had been laid to rest, and in their place, something new was being born. Something built not on lies and corruption, but on truth and courage, and the stubborn refusal to let evil win. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything. 6 months later, Grace and Ezekiel stood together in front of Reverend Crawford and the assembled community. Grace wore a beautiful buckskin wedding dress, traditional Apache beadwork covering the bodice. Her long black hair was adorned with eagle feathers and turquoise stones. She stood tall and proud, no longer the broken woman who had arrived 6 months ago, but a warrior who had fought for justice and won. Ezekiel wore clean clothes but remained true to himself, his chest bare beneath an open vest, the scars that marked him visible to all, proof that he had survived, that he had lived. Mary Chen stood beside Grace as witness, tears streaming down her face. Tommy Hayes stood with Ezekiel, the boy who had found his own courage and helped his father find his conscience. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." They kissed as the sun set over the White Mountains, and the crowd cheered, Apache and white, Chinese and Mexican, all the people who had been called outsiders, all the people who had been told they did not belong. Together now, united by the belief that justice mattered, that ordinary people could change the world. 1 year later, Grace sat in the shade of her porch, one hand resting on her swollen belly, 8 months pregnant. The baby kicked strongly against her palm. Ezekiel sat beside her, his large hand covering hers, feeling their child move. "You are still training. The baby is coming soon. Apache women work until birth. This baby will be born strong." She laughed. "Besides, you worry too much. Can you blame me?" "No," she leaned her head against his shoulder. "But Anna's death was not your fault. And I am not Anna. I am strong. We will be fine. I know." But his arm tightened around her. "I will worry anyway. That is what fathers do." 43 years later, Grace Nighthawk Frost sat in the same spot on the same porch. Now 70 years old, her hair was white, her face lined with the marks of a life well lived. But her amber eyes were still bright, still fierce. Ezekiel sat beside her. 85 now, weathered and gray, but still strong, still present. They had built a good life together. 3 children, 7 grandchildren. The ranch had prospered. The town had changed. Slowly, imperfectly. But it had changed. A young girl approached, 12 years old, dark hair and gray eyes, a blend of Apache and white, of Grace and Ezekiel. Grandmother, is it true you killed the bad man who hurt our people? Grace looked at her granddaughter and smiled. I did what was necessary. Your grandfather and I both did. Tell me the story, please. And so Grace told it. Not the sanitized version, not the heroic tale, but the truth. About fear and courage. About choosing to fight instead of run. About ordinary people standing together against corruption. When she finished, the girl was quiet for a long moment. I want to be like you when I grow up. Then be brave. Be honest. Stand up for what is right, even when it is hard. Especially when it is hard. Ezekiel reached over and took Grace's hand, their fingers intertwined, scarred and weathered, but still strong, still together. We survived because we had each other. Remember that, little one. Strength alone is not enough. You need someone to fight beside. The camera pulled back, showing the ranch, the land they had built together. Apache and white families working side by side. Children playing without seeing color or difference, just seeing friends. Grace's voiceover came one final time. I came to these mountains broken. I left them whole. I came alone. I left loved. I came a slave. I left free. This is my home. This is my family. This is my triumph. The screen faded to black on the image of Grace and Ezekiel holding hands, watching the sunset together. 2 warriors who had found peace. 2 survivors who had found love. 2 people who had changed the world simply by refusing to give up.